This is Air Transat, the #1 rated leisure airline in all of North America. But according to some reviews, people disagree with this. So today, I bought a flight for $700 just so we could see what they are actually like. So it's time to get things started from Toronto International Airport, and I was not prepared for what was soon to come.
Normally when I fly, it's some local Canadian or American airlines, but today I'm taking a 7-hour red-eye flight to Europe on Air Transat, which I have never flown before. And so far I looked up some of the reviews and they were pretty mixed, and even when I was doing the check-in process, we got off to a pretty interesting start.
As always, I started off by putting in my confirmation number to check in, but for some reason it gave me an error message twice before finally working. After that, I had to look over any possible restrictions, confirm the seat that I wanted to be in, finalize that my documentation was proper, and then after all of that, we were fully checked in.
So today, I'm gonna be in seat 44A, which is luckily a window seat, but let's head inside to departures to get our boarding pass and see what the Air Transat staff are like.
In Toronto, Air Transat flies out of the smaller Terminal 3, which is still quite nice, but today it was incredibly busy with flights. So naturally, I made my way over to the kiosk area in order to print off my boarding pass.
Excuse me, if we already checked in but just need our boarding pass, do we just go that way? Here? Okay, thank you. Hi.
All right, can I have passport?
There you go.
Oh, and where are you flying today?
Lisbon.
Okay, so this is your flight, this is your seat.
Perfect.
Do you have any checked-in baggage or is
No,
that
just the carry-on.
All right, we're gonna print you a boarding pass. Because I know some people have them on their phones nowadays, but
Perfect.
it's just more real when you hold it like a sandwich.
I know. Thank you so much. All right, that was super awesome. The Air Transat staff were incredibly nice. I've never had an airline basically do my check-in for me. And so far, I have to say Air Transat staff got a solid 10 out of 10.
Now, if you're traveling with checked bags, you would normally head over to the main desk here, but since we were ready to go, it was time for security. Thanks to being an Amex cardholder, I got priority security. So after scanning my code, I was able to skip the line and get through in literally 2 minutes.
Alrighty, that went way smoother than expected. I was fully prepared for the airport to take super long, especially because this is an international flight. I feel kind of bad though because I cut an entire family off and I got the dirtiest looks because of it. But because we're flying international today, we have 2 possible lounges to check out. So we're gonna be looking at both of them and seeing which is actually better.
So after making our way through the airport, we made it to our first lounge, which is the Air France KLM Business Lounge. The first thing that stood out to me about this lounge were the massive windows overlooking the runway, which could be viewed from the various seating areas to choose from. Making our way to the food, I found a salad area and hot dishes where Thai chicken, spring rolls, hash browns, veggies, and pizza were being served. But I was also happy to find soups and rice as well. Going along with the food, there were plenty of drinks and kinds of alcohol to choose from, but I decided to keep my meal smaller because I was going to be eating on the flight and also in the other lounge.
So this lounge is definitely on the smaller end of things, but the food was really good. Everything looks super nice in here, and on top of that, the staff were incredibly friendly. Overall, I'd have to give it a solid 8 out of 10. And while we're waiting in the lounge, I thought that now would be a great time to show you guys some of the reviews of Air Transat.
Like I said earlier, Air Transat was voted North America's best leisure airline in 2022, where some people raved about it, saying the flights were flawless and the most enjoyable they have ever been on. Meanwhile, on the other side, you have Air Transat only having a 5 out of 10 customer rating, where multiple people complained about how they would never fly them again.
So unlike most of the airlines that I review, I've never actually flown Air Transat, so I am incredibly excited to see what they're like. But before we do that, we still have one more lounge to check out.
The second lounge for today is the Plaza Premium International Lounge. Right off the bat, this lounge was triple the size of the other, which came with a full bar for guests to get alcohol, along with a shower and massage room. Another thing that was unique about this lounge was a play area for kids, which is awesome, especially for those families who travel together. Moving on to the food was a display of desserts and various salads, with hot foods consisting of noodles, meatballs, beef, samosas, fries, and much more. Since the food looked so good, I decided to grab a full plate alongside a glass of wine, where again, I was able to watch the planes as I enjoyed my meal. After finishing up, I headed to the bathroom, which was incredibly nice, to brush my teeth and take my contacts out, so we could finally head down and board the overnight Air Transat flight.
So it looks like things are still on time, which is a really good sign. Now for today's flight, I'm gonna be at the very back of the plane in seat 44A, which I was telling you guys about earlier. When I was looking at a seat map, I basically had a choice between a 3x3, which I didn't want to do, but at the very back of the plane, they actually had a 2x2. So luckily I have the window seat, and last time I checked, there was nobody sat beside me. me. So fingers crossed, I am gonna have the entire row to myself because that would be unreal on a red-eye flight. But it is now time to finally board the plane. So let's see what Air Transat is actually like.
On today's flight, we'd be flying on an Airbus A330, which I rarely get to fly on, and it looks like this flight is going to be completely full.
Hi there. Hello. Oh, there you go. Thank you, have a good one. 7-hour red-eye flight, here we go. Fingers crossed no one's beside us and we'll be able to sleep, because normally I can never sleep on planes.
And soon enough, after making our way down the bridge, it was time to get on board.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome on board.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. 44A right here, so it's about.
Thank you.
Now, I'll be honest, I didn't realize how far back 44A actually was, but making my way there, you got to see what the normal 3x3 economy seats look like. Eventually, I made my way to the very back, and compared to the 3x3, you could definitely see why I wanted the 2x2 instead. My initial impression of the seats was pretty good. They seemed to be quite comfortable, but later in this flight, I'll tell you my actual thoughts on them after 7 hours. Anyway, since I was in the first 2x2 row, there was an empty back on the furthest seat away from me, which was definitely interesting. And I was also shocked to find there was no air conditioning on the overhead above, and it was very hot in here.
So first impressions, it is really hot in here and I'm surprised that there is no air conditioning. But these 2x2s are super cool, especially compared to those 3x3s. Now fingers crossed I get this entire row to myself because it is a little bit tight.
Now one thing that I really liked about this seat was the 2 full windows I had access to. And for someone who is 5'8", there is a huge amount of legroom and a decent amount of recline, which is great for these overnight flights. Making our way to the pouch in front, we could find this safety pamphlet and the menu for in-flight food. On this flight, we were going to be given a free meal, and if you wanted more, there was always the option. But what was surprising to me is how you needed to pay $11 if you wanted a blanket, otherwise you would get nothing. The tray table on the seat was also an okay size. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't too small, and it also pulled out, which was nice to see. On the overhead above, there was plenty of space for bags, and as you can see, there were a ton of seats in this plane, so the storage was definitely needed. Now, shortly after getting my initial impressions, we began to push back from the gate and head towards the runway. For tonight's flight, we'd be flying 7 hours and 15 minutes from Toronto to Lisbon, Portugal, and before I knew it, we were on the runway and taking off. Now that we were in the air, I decided to check out the in-flight entertainment, and even though the screen wasn't the biggest and there weren't a ton of movies to choose from, the selection was good enough and would make do for the 7 hours. On the screen was also how I could access the overhead light above in case I wanted to read, but this wasn't going to be happening, but it's still good to know about. The one thing that was quite disappointing was the flight map was extremely basic, and you weren't able to explore whatsoever, which sucks because normally I enjoy playing around with it. Beside the screen was a USB 3 port and a headphone jack, which unfortunately were the only ports on the seat because there were no outlets for charging devices. And on a 7-hour flight, this was sad to see because I'm sure a lot of people's devices would be dying because of this. But anyways, soon after getting to altitude, the in-flight service came around for dinner.
We have chicken or pasta?
Can I do pasta, please? Thank you.
Overall, the food looked pretty decent, but after finishing it, I'll be honest, it was pretty meh and probably a 6 out of 10 at best. After finishing the meal, it was time to use the washroom before bed, and unfortunately, one of them was out of service, causing a substantial lineup. After getting inside, the bathroom itself was pretty good though, having everything you could possibly want, and on top of that, it was quite clean. After heading back to my seat, it was time to get some sleep, and trying to keep in mind that I have never been able to sleep on a plane, the same was true here. No matter how hard I tried to get comfortable, nothing worked, and the lack of pillow or blanket also didn't help whatsoever. Another complaint that I had was the blue ambient light was super annoying because it was still quite bright, and I'd much rather it be dimmer so at least there'd be some darkness in the cabin. Anyways, after hours of trying to get some sleep, the sun started to come up as we approached Europe, so I gave up and just stayed awake for the rest of the flight.
I think it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. I did not sleep whatsoever. I was basically like sleeping, then not sleeping. I maybe slept 15 minutes. It was basically impossible to sleep too. The seat was just impossibly uncomfortable. My back right now is pretty much destroyed. The red-eye flights officially suck.
Now that it was morning, the lights changed to a bright purple as the crew came around to hand out the light snack, which was banana bread and also a morning drink.
Any coffee or tea?
Can I get an apple juice, please?
Anything else?
Thank Thank you. That's all.
Soon after finishing, we were quickly approaching Lisbon, and before I knew it, we were coming in for landing. So now one question remains. What is my honest final review of Air Transat, and should you fly them? Right off the bat, I will say the staff were amazing and definitely a pleasure to interact with. But when it came to the flight, I do have to say the seats were just okay and the food was mid-tier at best. But at the end of the day, Air Transat is one of the cheaper transatlantic options. Overall, I give them a solid 7 out of 10, and after watching this video, you should check out this one where I compared 2 of North America's worst airlines.